very good afternoon and welcome to the FSC's ReGenerations Conference, and this is our very ever last session for 2021. It's been a pretty huge year for all of us, bit of a roller coaster ride depending on where you live and what you do, but delighted to have reached this point, and also delighted that we're going to launch today our financial capability for women research, which is a really important part of not only the conversation we've been having for a little while, but certainly into 2022. So a few shout outs and a few thank yous. Firstly, to our sponsors. You've made all the things around ReGenerations possible. And as I've said before, a huge thank you for your patience as we've moved from face-to-face to online to digital and so on. Just to give you a sense of it, we've had 38 or 39 odd sessions. We've had close to 3,000 people dipping into the various programs. We've had over 140 speakers. So it's been a huge undertaking from the conference perspective, and these things can't happen without the very gracious and generous support of our partners and sponsors. So thank you very much. In terms of the research itself, wanted to call out Trustees Executors, who've been our commercial partner and partner in the research now for a number of years, and again has allowed us to really shine the light on so many interesting and diverse things over the last few years, everything from tapping into the financial resilience indicators as we went into lockdown, all the way through to financial advice, pulse checks, the rise of retail platforms, Kiwi Saver, and we've brought it all together under this money and you idea, and fits really, really nicely with the overarching strategy of the FSC, which is to help New Zealanders with their financial confidence and well-being. And today's discussion really in that context, absolutely relevant. Also just wanted to acknowledge and shout out to the FSC's research committee under the fantastic leadership of Trish and Hamish and everyone on that committee. They are the people who've made all this possible and tireless effort across the board there. But at this point, I'm going to invite and hand over to Anne Morrell from Trustees Executors for a little comment and message from the sponsors. As I say, they've been with us for a number of years. So Anne, over to you, and thanks again to the ongoing support of Trustees.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate that. And hello, and everyone, and welcome to the launch of this Money and You research on women and financial wellbeing in New Zealand. As Richard said, I'm Anne Morrell. I am a private wealth advisor here at Trustees Executors, and I'm really pleased to be able to give this introduction on behalf of Trustees Executors and also to take part in the panel discussion today. I guess, firstly, a huge thank you to the FSC for the opportunity for us to sponsor. Trustees Executors have been proud to be involved with the Money and You research series for the past 2 years, and we have really valued our partnership with the FSC and the important work that they do in bringing to the fore the financial wellbeing and confidence of all New Zealanders. The research that Core Data collects and analyses is incredibly valuable for us as an industry to better understand the needs of Kiwis and the markets that we serve. And Trustees Executors is a very strong supporter of financial literacy, and we know that the ability for people to make informed decisions regarding the use and management of their money is crucial to provide better outcomes both now and in their retirement. This research highlights some very interesting findings and shows us that women do face some challenges in attaining financial confidence and overall well-being. And for myself, as an advisor of 30 plus years, I've also found that every woman's personal circumstances are unique to them. And with personalised guidance and advice, it has been really gratifying for me to see many of my female clients realise their goals and increase their confidence, particularly when it comes to investing. But we're really still at the start of the journey, I think. I'm looking forward to being part of the panel today and discussing what we can do as an industry to help women become better financially prepared. Thank you to my fellow participants, panellists, for taking the time out at such a busy time of year, and we really appreciate your participation. And I'd also like to applaud the whole FSC team and their committees for continuing to curate such valuable and thought-provoking events like this, no matter what the format is. And I look forward to attending more of these in person, hopefully, in the coming year. And finally, on behalf of Trustees Executors, we hope that everyone has a safe and happy Christmas break, and that you return rested and ready for an exciting 2022. Go. Thank you, Richard. Yep.
Thank you, Anne, and totally agree with your comments. And in fact, the reason why we do a lot of this research is to start the conversation, and very much the discussion that we're having today is a conversation starter. It's designed to put the spotlight on a particular topic, as we've done with lots of issues over the last few years, but then to start and generate the conversation. And this year, in fact, just at the start of last week, we were delighted to launch our diversity and inclusion initiative. And Lockyer, who's with us today, is a core part of that work. And so starting the diversity inclusion discussion with evidence base, with expertise, is really part of where we're heading. And so that's part of the discussion. I'm going to just give you a very quick look at some of the findings, but I think today most of the discussion is with Riss and the panel to explore and undertake. So, David, if we perhaps head to the key findings slide, I'll just unpack just a few of these key points. This research went out to over 2,000 New Zealanders and has informed a lot of our research that we've done through the year. And there'll be a substantive report. There's a substantive media release. All of this stuff will be released on the website. So if you want a copy of the report, just feel free to head to the FSC website probably tomorrow morning. So key findings, 5 of them. First one is that over 60% of women are worrying about money daily, weekly, or monthly, and that's a key issue for all of us. Irrespective of our circumstances. The second finding is that 62% of women don't feel prepared for retirement. However, money worries decrease with age. The third finding is that over 80% of women rate their financial wellbeing low, moderate, or very low, and over 60% of women rate their investing literacy low. There are some green shoots, and I think Anne's perspective is exactly right. It's very much a personal circumstance. Everyone's situation is unique. These are kind of broad scale findings. Some of the green shoots is that 32% of women plan to use or have used micro investing platforms. So kind of really interesting. If we just, I might just go to just briefly a couple of the key points on key finding 2, which is the preparation for retirement. There's been a broad discussion that we've been having, in fact, the Minister's been having around KiwiSaver. And this is around adequacy of retirement, how much people are putting into KiwiSaver. You can see on the slide there on the basis it's back up. Most people are putting in 3%, some are putting in 4%. There's a whole lot of people not contributing at all, and so it goes. And of course, the other key finding that we've pulled out, is that mostly women will have more interrupted work patterns than men, and that, of course, impacts both their savings. It certainly impacts their KiwiSaver adequacy and savings plans, and all of that's playing through broadly into this discussion. For those of you who might have seen the KiwiSaver 2.0, it was a very illuminating discussion that we had on the conference panel last week, but it does bring into very stark question around this preparation for retirement and what role KiwiSaver plays in it, which is entirely related to work and work patterns, contribution levels, savings, and so on and so forth. I might just head a couple on to key finding 4. Riss, I think you might be driving the slide deck. Thanks so much. And this picks up the issue around investing and literacy, which, I think is changing before our eyes with the rise of the retail platforms and some of the other data that's coming through. So, I think the discussion we're having both in the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, the discussion we're having with the Retirement Commission is very much about how do we help shift the literacy dial? How do we get people confident and comfortable about money topics early on? And again, for those of you who might have seen the Money and You initiative that we launched at conference last week, we asked the school kids of New Zealand that question: why does money matter? And it was a very open discussion, and it was fantastic to see not only the school kids, but to see both boys and girls grasp hold of the topic and kind of really engage with it. And so financial capability and financial literacy and the things that we do at an industry body, the things that we do at a household level and a personal level are all really relevant. But some of these macro data pieces obviously kind of play into it. I might just go for last comment and last slide, Risk, to key finding 5. And this is kind of the take up of other products and services. And what we can see on the left-hand side of the slide is the ubiquity of the way in which we think about bank accounts, KiwiSaver products and so on, and the take-up rate right across the marketplace. Further towards the middle of the slide deck or the bar charts, and towards the end, you can kind of start to see the pick of things like robo-advice, micro-investing platforms, buy now, pay later, digital currencies, and so on. And there's so much movement taking place in the money space, whether it's the Reserve Bank investigating the future of currency and money, all the way through to the rise of digital platforms and crypto and so on. And so these are conversations that are happening all over the world, and certainly all over New Zealand. So that is in closing this little part of the discussion, that's a very highlights tour, just to give you a flavour of the discussion. Obviously, the KiwiSaver, this research needs to be seen as part of the broader set of research that we do. But like I say, in terms of the diversity and inclusion conversation that we've been launching and talking about now for a few months, it really paves the way for a much more detailed, much more in-depth discussion as we take it on into 2022. And with that, let me commend the research to you, and let me absolutely commend the panel to you, and hand you over to the very capable hands of Clarissa Hirst and a fantastic panel. I'm really looking forward to what the panel has to say as they unpack a little bit of the data and some of the other issues that have come up. Riss, kia ora, and over to you.
Thanks, Richard. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Clarissa Hirst, and I lead the Consumer Communications and Research projects here at the Financial Services Council. And I'm delighted to be facilitating this panel discussion today. Just to follow on from what Richard said, this research very much forms a part of the FSC's broader research agenda, and this is really just a starting point to really start thinking about this topic and delving into this gender conversation and diversity conversation. And we'll be looking to delve a bit more deeper into some of these themes next year. But without further ado, I will introduce our fantastic lineup of speakers. We've got Anna-Marie Lockyer, General Manager at AA Money. We've got Anne Morrell, who you just heard from earlier, Private Wealth Advisor at Trustees Executors. Catherine Emerson, Head of Marketing and Customer Strategy at Kernel and co-host of the It's No Secret podcast. And finally, Sarah Kelsey, host of the OneUp Project podcast. Kia ora and welcome, everyone. It's really fantastic to have you here with us today for the final conference session. So today I'm just going to ask you to delve a bit deeper into some of these research findings and share your views on the topic. And for anyone watching at home, if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to just drop them in the Q&A, and we'll try and pick up as many as we can. Hopefully we'll be able to get to all of them. Now I might just hand over to each of the panelists one at a time to just kind of share a bit more about who you are and what you do, and some of your thoughts on the topic. So Sarah, we might kick off with you if that's all good. If you'd just like to share a little bit about yourself and the OneUp project and what that's all about, and perhaps the main theme or issue that tends to crop up for you in the conversations that you have with wahine.
Yeah, sure. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you for having me. Firstly, I feel really excited that I get to speak on some of these things because I talk about it so often with people in my DMs of the podcast. So yeah, I host a podcast called the OneUp Project, which focuses on financial literacy and self-development and trying to make those topics, less boring and more relatable to the average person, so they actually feel like they want to get involved with it, not just because they have to and it's something that they feel like is, you know, just necessary part of life. So I've done that for the last 2 years and interviewed probably over 60 industry experts now, and then done a few solo episodes and kind of record my own journey through that, through learning financial literacy and stuff myself. So it's been really exciting. And for me, I get that absolute pleasure and luxury of speaking to people so often and having so many women specifically kind of pour their hearts out quite often through the DMs. I'll get very long messages about their money situation and what they've been struggling with, and kind of just, I guess, needing someone to talk to and having emotional support in that way. And definitely the most common theme that tends to crop up is around just a general lack of confidence towards money and towards dealing with their own personal finances. And it's obviously quite a common theme that has been seen across this research, and that we'll go into depth talking about a lot. Like one of the key findings within the report that we're discussing is that over 80% of the female respondents consider their financial wellbeing as moderate or poor. And I'd say that this has in part to do with a lack of confidence, and also the trend that women have lower financial confidence compared to men is a common theme as well that I see just within talking to people. I think it's one thing to, you know, have the knowledge and be given the education on what to do, but it's another thing to actually implement that, and another thing to actually action it. And a lot of women feel like they could learn and they could learn and they could learn, but actually putting that into practice is the hard part, and feeling confident to do that and like they actually know what they're doing. You know, for example, when it comes to investing, which is a really common topic we talk about, it's scary for so many women still, and they see it as extremely risky, when I think that is actually a really common misconception around building long-term wealth, is that investing doesn't have to be extremely risky, and you can mitigate those risks in so many different ways. And I think that there are heaps of influencing factors around women's confidence when it comes to money. But yeah, definitely that would be one of the biggest issues I'd say I talk about often with women and across the podcast.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah. And that whole investing conversation, I'm really keen to come back to that and delve into that a little deeper. And I noticed you were nodding away to some of what Sarah was saying. So I might go to you next. If you just want to give a little bit of an intro as to, what you see in your work as an advisor and in terms of the conversations that you're having with other women.
I think that what Sarah has said is just so true. And look, I've been in finance for sort of over 40 years now, but financial advising for 20 plus. And I've seen a big change over that time frame. You kind of look at it and think that for you guys, I guess your grandmothers were handed their weekly housekeeping and worked on the budget of the household on that basis, and that was kind of the limit of their financial experience. And you would so often see as an advisor 20 years ago, women who were widowed or separated for some reason suddenly faced with this world where they needed to plan for their own future and bewildered by what was actually out there. And often I think it was because the language of investing has been so filled with jargon over the years that it became very exclusive and difficult for the concepts aren't hard. We know that what we do isn't rocket science, and it's not difficult to learn it. It's just really been a case of putting things more in plain language and in terms that everyone can understand and access the skills ultimately to plan for their own futures. And from my own experience, as I say, as an advisor, I would have seen women, again, a lot of the clients I see are either heading into retirement or in retirement already, and they're becoming more informed now. And as an older woman myself, I'm really, really heartened to see that younger women are taking charge of their futures now. And that to me is the best thing that we're seeing, is that more women are becoming focused on learning about how they can plan for their own futures and access financial security. But we all have a role to play in that. And I think that, as Sarah said, it's about building confidence. It is financial literacy. And I think from a women's perspective, we really need to trust who is providing the advice to us. And I think that forms part of the relationships that we build with our clients as well.
Thanks, Dan. I might go to you next, Kat, because you're also, I guess, you've got the advice background, but also, and to your point around breaking down jargon, I mean, that's something that, I mean, Sarah, you do that as well, and Kat with your It's No Secret podcast, it's something that it's really fantastic to see that so many people are actually starting to talk about it in a way that, you know, we can actually understand and relate to. So yeah, just wondering if what sort of is the main, I guess, theme or issue that comes up for you in the conversations that you have at Kernel and also through the podcast.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Hirst. So I'm Kat. I am head of marketing at Kernel, but I guess my kind of more passion piece is my slight side hustle, which I co-host with Christine, and that's a financial literacy podcast called It's No Secret. So prior to starting with Kernel, I was actually a financial advisor for 8 years in Australia and predominantly worked with the accumulator audience, so slightly different end to some of your clients. So those in their sort of, 20s through to 45s to really get them on track to putting in place the right financial steps. And that's the portion of, I guess, now New Zealanders that I'm really passionate about reaching. The whole point of our podcast is actually, something that you just touched on really nicely, Anne, was it's not rocket science. Like, there's actually no secrets in attaining financial freedom. There's no real tricks. Like, the industry isn't hiding purposefully, I don't believe, information from the general populace. It's just been made to look like that for a really long time. And I think part of that is to do with the fact that there is a ton of jargon, as you say, but there also hasn't been very good representation of all minorities, genders, parts of New Zealand to really show people that they can be part of the finance, investing, money world. And so, now that we have access to technology and the younger generations are really buying into the likes of financial Instagrams and podcasts and media and information, they're seeking out, I guess, relevant reference points to them. And that's probably the thing that we see the most from our audience that reach out to us, both at Kernel, but also at It's No Secret, is around seeing people that are doing similar things to them. Whether we like it or not, we ultimately all compare ourselves to what our neighbours are doing or what those in our peer groups are doing. And it's really hard to know if you're on track or if you're even going in the right direction because people don't have those reference points. And I think, there are some great things that some people in the industry are doing to highlight good case studies of, what great financial behaviour looks like. But the more that we can model that and break down some of the kind of everyday Kiwi journey when it comes to money, I think the more empowered, particularly females, will be in that whole area.
Great, thanks, Kat. And I might pass to you now. What are your thoughts on this topic? And maybe if you could just give a brief intro. I know you've had a lot of different roles, and it's just to give a bit of a rundown as to where you're at now, what you've sort of seen through your career so far.
Thanks, Hirst. Look, I'm very privileged to spend the last year or so setting up and heading a new business called AA Money, and we're here to help New Zealanders sort their vehicle finance needs. And it's something that I'm really passionate about, helping, I guess, the financial literacy across a new part of the industry around credit scores, credit quality, and the importance of that, actions that you take today to help you into the future with better options in that space. I'm also very passionate about this topic following 10 years or so managing one of New Zealand's largest KiwiSaver schemes. And noting, I guess, the growing gender gap in retirement savings balances, which really, really drew me into how can we help half of the population, and in fact, them help the other half of the population make the right decisions today that will give them a better future. And thirdly, I guess I am really passionate about diversity and inclusion because I'm the very proud mother of 3 beautiful girls, and anything I can do to influence their outcomes and their futures and that of their friends and the future generation feels like the right thing to be doing. We'd probably like to say well done to the FSC on what is a timely and relevant piece of research. I think certainly from my perspective, it allows the conversation, as Richard said, to build and to support, the D&I initiatives across the industry, which having been involved in the industry for a long time is well overdue. So really looking forward to the part we can play on that.
Brilliant. All right. And I think the first question I have for you is, and some of the other panelists have already touched on this, we've got this narrative and it's come through, in the research that we've just released, that women, we feel like we're not as financially confident. That confidence piece seems so key. We rate our financial well-being and our financial literacy and our investing knowledge is much lower than male respondents do. And I'm just keen to get your thoughts, Anna, and the rest of the panelists on whether this narrative is the right one, because we see it time and time again. It's quite a doom and gloom sort of message, but there's so much incredible work going on, and I think women are really starting to take charge of their finances and, quite frankly, killing it, as Sarah and Kat, I'm sure you can attest to. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that narrative, and does it need to shift, does it need to change?
Yeah, certainly the scores of the research do indicate that females are less confident than males, with a 60-40 split. And I think that's twofold. I'd say, firstly, there is a perception gap for a start. I think, males don't like to admit they don't know things, so they're always going to answer the question with a higher level of confidence than females. And so when we do the survey, I think we just have to take that bias into account, that that the females have answered more conservatively. So the 60-40 may be closer to a 50-50 in terms of the research results, if we kind of strip that bias out. I think what's really encouraging through the research is that more than 80% of females have got a varying degrees of knowledge. And I think what we have to remember, and what's come through, I think, from Kat's comments around people like us, is that no one actually has to be an expert. I know for myself, I'm going to say I don't know anything unless I know enough to be, reasonably confident. But actually, all I need to know is, where do I get that advice in a trusted and engaged way that I can relate to for myself? And that's what I love about the rise of technology, podcasts, and people like us comparisons.
I might jump to you now. I want to talk a little bit about the gender pay gap, because it's been getting a lot of coverage in the media lately. So I think it's quite a topical subject to touch on. And I guess we've got this confidence issue or challenge, but we've also got this very real gap when it comes to pay. We know it's currently sitting at 9.1% in Aotearoa, New Zealand. How much of our financial wellbeing do you think comes down to the gender pay gap, and what other factors are at play?
Yeah, it's such a good question, Rhys. It's interesting because, reflecting on this for this panel, I feel very strongly about the gender pay gap. We've actually done a whole episode on the podcast about women and money, where we tried not to rant too much, but, it's somewhat inevitable sometimes. But I guess my kind of view on this and the financial wellbeing piece is really interesting, because I know the FSC and also Te Ara Ahanga Retirement Commission have done a ton of work around financial wellbeing. And one of the things is that I wouldn't necessarily say that the pay gap is the main contributing factor to overall wellbeing. We do know that it has a significant and pronounced effect on your retirement, which does affect your wellbeing in the future. But I think when most people are talking about their financial wellbeing, it's very much in the here and now. And that's something that, from the Retirement Commission's research, they have found that actually the largest impact on improving your financial wellbeing is really in your behaviour. And the key behaviour is having an active savings behaviour. So really this mentality around a deliberate and regular saving amount, rather than just getting to the end of a pay cycle and kind of saving what's left over. And that, for me, I felt was a positive thing, because irrespective of the pay gap, that is a behaviour that most people can probably start to emulate and really work on. So, I felt at least a little bit positive in the sense that we have the ability to impact in a good way our financial wellbeing without necessarily also having to tackle the pay gap at the same time. And that's, I guess, my view would be always working on that active savings behaviour and the things that you can do now.
Great. And Anne, might go to you. What are your thoughts on this pay gap conversation and financial wellbeing? What else do you think contributes to financial wellbeing when it comes to women particularly?
I think that, again, because I'm clearly the oldest person in the room, I saw clearly. I started work in the late 1970s, and it was clearly evident throughout, and never stopped work. I didn't have a break in my career at all. And I could clearly see the effect of that that pay gap right from day one, just to, and access to promotions, all those sorts of things, and the evidence of the glass ceiling. The really good thing is that a lot of our workers, women before us, have done an enormous amount of work towards narrowing that gap. And I agree with Kat that I think that the gap itself has narrowed significantly. Women still do face enormous challenges in terms of how they enter their later years towards retirement, because often it's the years they take off for raising a family that can have a really big impact on the amount of money that they have as they enter into retirement. And I think that part of that still also comes down to their attitude towards themselves. I think women have always had a tendency to put themselves second, and so they, even while they may have a savings behaviour, the children will go to the bank of mum and dad, when they need money, and that they will give out the money, which is their future income requirement as they go into retirement. So I think that we've certainly moved a long way, and it's really heartening to see that. But I think there needs to be a real kind of focus, education on the value, as Kat says, of that savings and active savings behaviour. I think that is probably key to all New Zealanders having some sense of financial wellbeing as they enter retirement. I think that we've, as a nation, until KiwiSaver came in, we always spent everything and thought about saving for our retirement last. Now retirement savings has moved further up the food chain. It's probably a wee bit behind saving for the first home, but that's obviously a really big challenge for a lot of people, young people in particular. But I think putting savings top of the agenda as people enter the workforce, so that it's just it just becomes a natural thing that takes place, that you save first, and you will always find money for the things that you want to do on a pleasurable basis out of what is left over. Flip it round. Don't do all the things that you want to do and save what's left. Save first and then spend what's left over from there. And I think that if we can change that attitude, it'll go a long way towards the financial well-being of everyone. So
I love that advice, Anne. I love that advice in terms of save first. I've been reflecting on some of the structural changes more recently over the last couple of weeks with my children, with one of my children, with my daughter's graduating school at the moment. And it was awesome to see the graduation. It was awesome to see 100 really successful, confident young ladies embarking on moving from college to university. And within their graduation pack, they received a list of where all the students were going as their next move from secondary school. And 98% of the girls that were leaving her college were going to university to study a degree. And I sort of said to the kids, back in my day, it probably would have been half, and back in your grandmother's day, it probably would have been 5%. So it's awesome to see that structural change. But the other thing that really heartened me with that age group coming out of college and heading into university is their focus on summer holiday work, their desire to get summer holiday work, the desire for them to start saving for their university courses and not jumping straight into using student loans as their sole method of finance, but also the fact that they are starting in KiwiSaver from the day they get their summer jobs, and that saving habit starts to grow, that active savings, before they can actually make the decision and have that money in their pocket. And I think that'll set them up a good stead for life.
There's a question that's just come through that sort of touches on some of the things you were talking about. It's from someone who's a doting father of a wonderful 23-year-old daughter. And as a parent yourself, you might be the best person to answer this, but he sort of asked, how do I support the women in my life, like my daughter and my wife, to grow their financial well-being? Would you have any tips from what you've sort of seen work with your own kids?
Oh, look, I think from my perspective, we're in a funny generation with young kids with plastic fantastic. When we go and pay at the supermarket with our card and they can't actually see, there has to be money behind that card before we pay. So I think one of the really important things is to, explain to your kids when you're doing the most basic things that actually you do need money before you make some of these decisions. It's fabulous as a parent to be able to support our children and to give them some of the things that they might like in life, but a probably better lesson for them is to encourage them to contribute and save and access some of these things themselves.
I've got another question that just came through, and Kat or Anne, you might want to take this one, but does anyone on the panel know what proportion of financial advisors are women? I suspect it is on the low side, and if so, is this a reason why women are not seeking financial advice as much as men?
I guess I can only answer this anecdotally, so I don't actually know the statistical numbers, but I guess from going to industry events and seeing the number of women there, we are growing and there are more women. I've said in the past, and I've spoken to fund managers and executives from various financial firms and what have you, and they say, oh, it's so hard to get women advisors, and they say, it's really hard to get women applicants, and my comment around that is often it comes back to the jargon thing and about how women think in terms of, and confidence. Often roles for financial advisors are advertised with a list of attributes, like financial attributes with regards to analysis and market understanding and all those sorts of things. And, a male will tend to look at that and think, well, if there are 10 things there I need for the job, I can do 3 of them, but that's all right, I can bluff my way through the rest and that's fine. A woman looking at it might look at it and think, oh, I can do 6 of those things, so I'm not good enough, so I won't apply. So I think getting women into the industry, we need more. We are growing, which is great, but we do need more. And I think that we need to understand that as women, encouraging other women to be advisors, that it's about, you really are about helping people realise their financial goals. And that's about talking to people and, most importantly, listening to them. So having the capacity to listen to what's important to people in their lives, where they want to be financially. Women are really good at that. We are natural listeners, I think. So anybody listening, watching today, and you've got young women, encourage them to explore financial advice as a career. I love it. It's probably been the best thing I've done is to be a financial advisor. It's extremely satisfying, and there's nothing quite like knowing that you're making a real difference in people's lives. So more women.
I think on that too, we've definitely seen a huge uptake in the number of women that are getting interested in investing, and sort of the number of like female podcasters in New Zealand it's incredible. Like we had the other day, I was reading that the Kiwi podcast Girls That Invest, which is run by 2 New Zealand women of colour, it's currently the #1 business podcast in the United States, which is just so incredible to see. And I'm wondering, so we'll turn to the investing conversation now, because in the research we found that women rated their investing knowledge and experience much lower than the male respondents did, probably not surprising. But then other research that's been done shows that when we do invest, we're not half bad at it. In fact, we actually outperform men. It's not a huge difference, but we're clearly not as terrible as we think we are. Sarah, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what's driving this change. There's clearly an appetite among women, especially young women, to start investing and learn more and get involved. What's driving it, and what more can we do to really continue this momentum and build on it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I feel like so many more women, especially young women, crave that independence and financial independence, and they want to feel like they are in control of their life and they're guiding it. And that's like a real shift, I think, just generally with women, is that it's the same with their careers. It's the same in other aspects as well. They want to feel like they are in control and they're driving that, and that the result comes as the result of that comes as a result of what they've put into it. And so they're seeking out education so much more, which is really exciting. And I guess it's easy for me to say that there's so much more women getting involved, because the ones that are getting involved are coming to my podcast, or to It's No Secret, or to Girls That Invest. So we have that community built in front of us already. But I think it's not only that they're interested in it, they're like actively asking questions, they're actively getting involved, wanting to know practically how to do it, which shows that they will then go and act on it, which I think is so important, because when I started the podcast, it wasn't just about giving out information and saying, you know, here you go, do with this what you want. It's like, this is actually how you can do it so that you can go forward and action it. So I think that just women generally wanting independence is a huge part of that, and being able to provide not only just education, but education that is relevant specifically to them is really important as well, so that we can feel like we can do it. And, you know, as Anne was saying before, when it comes to applying for a job, naturally women tend to, you know, think if I'm 70% of the way there, I'm not all the way there, but men, if I'm 30% of the way there, I'll take a risk. And so for women, we, I think, need to learn how to take more risks and feel like we can jump into things. But then that also speaks to the conversation around some of these things shouldn't be seen as risky, but they still are. And so kind of taking that out of it as well, I think, is really important. But yeah, just overall, I think wanting more of a sense of independence in their life is a huge contributing factor.
Both you and Kat, you and Christine, and it's no secret as well, like you do share some sort of personal experiences, and, you know, Sarah, your whole thing was that, you know, you're learning along with everyone else, and it makes it so much more relatable. Do you find that sort of approach helps in terms of people can actually learn along with you? They don't feel like you're this really distant professional, but you're actually just like them.
Yeah, that's like 100% key. Like, I think someone touched on building trust before, and I think that trust is built when they feel like they can relate to you. And for me, I'm massive on saying, like, I'm no, you know, more intelligent than the next person. I've only started investing a year and a half ago. I still have days where, well, I have lots of weeks where I go out and spend all my money and then don't stick to my budget because I wanted to go out with my friends. Like, I'm still 23 years old and want to do all of that stuff as well. And so I think being like that just shows that you can still have an active interest in this. You can still want to grow wealth long term. You can still want to be independent and in control of your finances, and you can still have all the other stuff as well. It's possible. So yeah, 100% being relatable helps build that trust and that relationship so much more. And I think that will be important when it comes to, I guess, women seeking financial advice more as well, as building that trusting relationship and feeling like they can actually relate to their advisor, and their advisor isn't this far off, distant, intelligent genius that they could just never understand.
It's actually really interesting that in the research we found that more women than men are likely to consider taking professional financial advice, but they're actually less likely to receive it. I'm just wondering if any of you have any thoughts on why this is the case. Like, we're thinking about it, but we're not actually taking it. Why do you think that is?
I could probably jump in and then I'll pass over to the financial advisors. Look, from the conversations that I've had with customers and clients in the past, and friends, certainly from a female's perspective, it's very much, I think, about trust, engagement, and saying it how it is, in a relatable way that I can understand it. And that's kind of how we operate as females. We are more conservative, and we do need to have that trust and relationship built. But I think probably, Anne, you might have some fair ideas from some of your customers' interactions.
I think, yes, thanks, Anna. And that, as you know, when I was kind of preparing for this, trust was top of the list of issues that I was kind of thinking about, followed by confidence. And again, I guess where I sit in terms of my financial advice, I am kind of looking after people at the end of their working career and looking at investing a lump sum. And, you know, women come into that space often with a smaller pool of money for the reasons that we've talked about, with the gender pay gap and broken careers and what have you. But also, you know, a lifetime of having somebody else make a lot of the large financial decisions for them. And trust is huge in terms of what they do next. And women also tend to, a lot of my women clients who are in that space, who are, say, single women for whatever reason, whether they're widowed or separated or never married even, as you know, is they will come to me on the advice of a friend. So that will be the catalyst to actually get them to make a decision. Often they'll, the number of women that you'll see that will just keep their money on term deposit in the bank because that's what they've always done. They feel safe and secure doing that, and they kind of don't have the courage to even know where to look for financial advice. Banks provide a service for people, and valuable it is too. But again, I don't know that women are that proactive in asking and seeking that advice. So there is a tendency, I think, to rely on their female friends' experience. And again, as all of us as women investors ourselves, we need to talk about it amongst our friends and share, because we're quite private as well about our own personal circumstances. But, you don't have to tell everybody everything, but it's about telling people what the options are. I mean, for Sarah and Kat, you're probably way more experienced at the investment platforms that are available now, and I have delved into having a look at them more closely. And, as an older woman, the technology of it is a little bit scary. But if you talk to people, then it becomes less so. And we just need to share our stories more. And I think what you guys are doing with your podcasts and video presentations is huge. And I think maybe if we can think about some way of making that kind of format accessible to women of my generation as well. So then you can sit back and there's a fear that digital technology is a young person's thing. And, I can barely turn on the iPad and, they'll think, I can turn on my iPad, but I'll tell you what, I can't operate the video or the TV at home. I have no idea how it works. So there is a technology barrier. And I think there's an age group of women, say, kind of in that 55 plus, who really need advice now as well. And being able to make it accessible for them, I think, is probably one of the challenges as an industry we face. Young people are, as you say, Sarah, are really grasping the podcast format and the new technologies and getting on board with saving and long-term saving and different investment options. We still need to think about that, as I say, the older investor, because it's not necessarily just women, but older investors, and how do we capture their imagination and teach them in a safe environment where they're not judged for being stupid in this modern world. Did that answer the question? I think I veered off somewhat, but
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point you made too, that women we're not just this homogenous group. There's so much diversity within women, people who identify as women. And I think that's a really important point, that, you've got different age groups within that as well, who use and approach financial services in totally different ways. Kat, did you have anything to add to that?
I did just have something to add on there, I guess, which also looping back on the question around, how many female financial advisors there are in New Zealand, and is that why perhaps women are interested in seeking advice, but they're not actually taking up advice in the same proportions as men are. And I think that is a contributing factor. But one, and not to offend anyone in the industry, that I would go out on a limb and say is that, broadly speaking, I think that financial advisors are perhaps not having the conversation with their female potential clients that they should be. I think they're missing the mark a little bit on that. And possibly that stat points out to me that, women are wanting to engage in this conversation, and then actually they're not getting the outcome that they thought, or the discussion that they thought. And, one thing that we see a lot across our customer base and our listeners of the podcast is, women are really engaged with the psychological aspects behind money and the stories that we're told, particularly when we grow up and throughout our lifetime, and how that impacts our behaviour. In my experience working with clients as well, like, men tend to shy away from that conversation a little bit more so than perhaps females do. And then also, depending on what stage you're wanting to seek that advice, we talk a lot about our customer segment called the family CFOs, where there's usually a couple involved, or two individuals involved in making financial decisions, but there will always be one predominant doer. And in my experience, the predominant doer defaults to being the person that is on the higher income, which, as we've talked about before, if you think about the gender pay gap and various choices that happen in people's lives, often tends to still be the male. So whilst females, I think, are sometimes involved, and we've seen this, UBS have actually done some really interesting research that showed that females actually have the highest percentage of involvement in day-to-day expense management and running the day-to-day finances of business, a household, but will always defer the long-term financial planning aspects to their spouse. And I think it's perhaps just, from the industry's point of view, engaging people like females, particularly if they are in a couple, into that conversation in the right way so that they feel empowered to be part of that discussion. And it's a hard thing to do.
Thanks. I might try and wrap things up now with a final question. It's a two-part question, which I'd like each of you to answer. So what is one action that Kiwi women can take to improve their own financial wellbeing? And what's an action that we as an industry can take to help them do that? Anna, I might start with you.
Thanks. I think one action, I guess, that Kiwi women can take is reach out for information. Reach out for information from your KiwiSaver provider, your bank, your financial advisor, or trusted friends and family. I think that's one. And from an industry perspective, I think, look, we can assist our staff. We can promote policies that reduce the gender gap and building confidence and career growth for males and females alike that allow them to be in good stead. And probably, if I'm allowed just one third one from an individual perspective, is discuss with family, friends, as everyone, as a daughter, a sister, a mum or a friend. And in some way they trust you in that regard. So we've all got stories. We don't know all the answers, but we'll all get there together.
Right, and do you have any actions you think?
Well, that's hard following Anna. That was really good. I don't know what else is left there. I think it really is about, it really is about having the conversations with everybody around you. That we need to take the mythology out of investing and just make it easier for us to all understand. And I love the idea of telling stories, because I think that Kat, you said that we relate to stories, and all of you who are parents out there, it's about telling your children the stories of money and how you as an adult got to be in the situation that you were. And I think that spending money has, and I think you mentioned it, Anna, earlier on, or it might have been Sarah, that it's so easy to spend money these days. Again, as I say, it's the oldest person in the room. When I started work, I had my wages went into my check account and I had a checkbook, and I kept a running balance in my checkbook. Even before that, our post office savings accounts, as children, we physically saw the number that was our savings. And if we took any money out to spend it, we had an emotional loss, a link to taking that money out and the cause and effect of the consequence of those decisions. And I think somewhere along the way with easy money, we have lost the connection between having money, spending it, and the consequences of that spend as well. So I think as parents, we need to reconnect our children with their money and their spending habits. I think Banker is a really good, activity that's taking place in schools to, connect children with spending and saving. But even as adults, it's just so easy. I mean, it used to be even with your credit card, you still had to input your PIN number. So there was still that little moment of decision about, should I be spending this money? Now it's just pay, wave and gone, and you don't actually realise how much you've spent until you get the credit card bill in, a month later. So I think if we all take a moment to reconnect with our money, we'll become a little bit more conscious of how much we have and where it's going and where the leaks are, and be focused on saving. It doesn't need to be boring. You're still, Sarah, 23, you're just so young. You can save and you can have fun at the same time. It doesn't have to be this big, bad, onerous thing that you do. It shouldn't be a bad habit, like a bad habit. It should be something that you enjoy doing and get satisfaction from. And I think we need to bring satisfaction into accumulation. I don't know what else I can add to that. So,
Sarah, next up, what action would you suggest that Kiwi women can take to improve their own financial wellbeing, and what do you think the industry can do?
Yeah, I think also just touching on something Anne was talking about, how, there's something I've found interesting through the podcast is that a lot of people focus on kids and young people and getting them interested in finances, but actually they forget about all the generations above that never had that to begin with. And just because you're an adult doesn't mean you instantly understand how money works. And I think that's been a lot of people. I have a majority of the people who listen to my podcast and follow me on Instagram are older than me by at least 5 years. And so I have so many people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s messaging me saying how much this has helped them. And as someone who's 23, it really just makes me realize that everyone, my age is freaking out that we don't know anything about money, but really it's everyone. Like, no one knows, and a lot of people are scared to look stupid. And so I think opening up those conversations, as was being talked about before, is so key. And I think also actually just for women to try and action something, no matter how small it is, to just try and action something, whether it's $5 in the share market or whatever, to just see it and to watch it and to learn from that, I think is a really great way to apply practical knowledge to what you do moving forward. And it also helps you gain trust with yourself. And so the next time you go into doing something, you're like, okay, I did it last time. I've gained a little bit of trust with myself. I can take a little bit more risk and move forward and keep going. And I think that's really key and something I've seen help a lot of people that I've been surrounded by. And then when it comes to the industry, I think the obvious thing to me is making things less complicated and trying to remove as much jargon as possible and remove unnecessary parts of information. For example, there's lots of parts of finance or investing that could be risky, that could be complicated, but how much of that is actually relevant to the average person who's just wanting to build long-term wealth or just get a budget sorted? There's lots of things we could probably take out of the process of explaining something to someone to just only have the relevant information, and that will make it easier to explain. So that to me is something that I think would be awesome for the industry to implement as well.
Brilliant. And last word to you, Kat.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we can do for ourselves is really gaining clarity. And further to Sarah's point around just starting with something, oftentimes we see that where people fall down as they try and tackle everything in their financial world all at once and get super overwhelmed, which would even overwhelm me, even after doing that for myself and my husband for the last 10 years. So I think, starting with getting clarity, because there's a lot of power in knowing where you stand and then tackling one thing at a time as an individual. As the industry, I think, I have some notes here around, like, as an individual, it's really important around what narrative you choose to buy into. But I also think the financial services industry have a lot of responsibility around what narrative they are providing people, particularly Kiwis, women, younger people. So, making sure that whilst I think the financial basics don't really change, the world has really changed, and there's lots of different ways that we can bring that information and learning to people. And then also thinking around, well, what we were told, or what our parents' generation or grandparents' generation were told of saving your way to retirement being true, is that actually going to be true for your standard 20-year-old going forward? Does home ownership, is that an actual, realistic narrative that we need to be telling everyone in this day and age? Or is the world going to change in the next 20 years? And what does that look like? And how can we help people gain the confidence to navigate that? Because it is really hard, as Sarah says, if you're 23 or if you're 33 or 40 or 50. So, I think the more information and support that the industry can provide people in that space is really important.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thanks so much to all of you for a really fantastic discussion. And I know there's so much more that we could touch on and so much more that I'd love to discuss, but really this is just the starting point. And we're really looking forward to delving deeper into some of these topics and issues next year. So just wanted to wrap things up and say thank you so much to all of our panelists, and thank you everyone for tuning in to the last conference session of the year. Thank you so much to all of our generous sponsors, in particular to Trustees, Executors, for sponsoring this session, to Core Data, our fantastic partner with the research. We couldn't have pulled it off without you. And a huge thank you too to all the members of our Strategic Research Committee who provided feedback on this research and helped get the report to this point. And in relation to the report, we'll be putting that up on the FSC website. We'll be sharing it alongside with a recording of the session on our YouTube channel as well. So keep an eye out for that. And I guess thank you everyone for tuning in. It's been a very crazy year, but we're getting close to the end. And I hope you all have a safe and relaxing break, because we definitely all deserve it.